separates from the wing. This is called a stall. These leading edge strakes help to mitigate that. They act similarly to the canards of the Su-34, one of the planes the F-16 will likely be going up against in Ukraine, with 19 of them reportedly being taken down thus far in the war. Canards and leading edge strakes help produce lift during high angle of attack maneuvers. Canards placed close to the wing, like the Saab-37 Viggen, create a vortex that passes over the wing, ensuring the wing continues to get high energy airflow during high angle of attack maneuvers, which allows it to continue generating lift. During the development of the F-16, General Dynamics did consider a canard configuration, testing different configurations and geometries, including versions with no strakes or canards, with subscale models in wind tunnels, testing through its optimum maneuvering speeds between 0.4 and 0.8 Mach. The goal was to maximize lift and minimize drag at high angles of attack, producing graphs like this, and these were used to compare designs. As they were narrowing down on the design, they consulted NASA, and they found one area to improve on: the sharpness of the leading edge. General Dynamics had rounded the leading edge of the wing to weaken these high angle of attack vortices, but NASA advised them to sharpen the leading edge in order to strengthen them. The F-16 underwent a great deal of iterative design in the wind tunnel phase before eventually landing on the design we are familiar with today, with the long blended leading edge strake that makes the F-16 immediately recognizable. And this comes with an added benefit. It provides enough space for the barrel of the F-16's powerful 20mm rotary cannon. You can see the barrel of the M61 Vulcan hiding here, a minor clue to the weapon hidden within the fuselage of the tiny plane. One of the early conclusions of the Red Baron report was that the lackluster armament of the F-4 made it difficult for it to compete in close-quarter battles. It lacked an internal cannon, which left the F-4 without offensive options in close-quarter battles, where missiles could not be safely used. The F-4 was eventually retrofitted with the M61 slung underneath the plane. But the F-16, looking to fix the problems of the past, came with the General Dynamics M61 Vulcan rotary Gatling gun as standard. And it was packed neatly inside the plane, creating minimal aerodynamic drag. The M61 is the smaller cousin of the A-10's GAU-8A, and while its rounds are tiny in comparison, the noise it emits still packs a punch, a massive cannon for a tiny aircraft. The 6-barreled cannon fires from the top position, spinning 16 times per second. The Gatling gun spews 120mm rounds per second. With an ammunition drum capable of holding just 511 rounds, the full ammunition drum can be unloaded in just over 5 seconds. The drum fits neatly behind the pilot here, and the vibration of the gun firing on the pilot's left side is jarring for many new pilots.
It is such a small fighter. You know, when you, and I think I've said this before, when you get into an F-16, you sit down and you strap into that, it's not like you're sitting in the jet, it's like you're wearing the jet. And the gun is right here. As I sit there in the cockpit, the gun barrels, the muzzles are right back here. It's just out of reach. It's so close though. And so when you shoot the gun and you're shooting 100 rounds a second of 20mm, it is unbelievably violent in the jet, but you're thinking about the target that you have to go and shoot. And so, you know, one of my experiences flying the F-16 was I was teaching as an instructor pilot at Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, Arizona. And so I had the privilege of taking in Air Force pilots. They're wearing wings, they've graduated Air Force pilot training, but they're not fighter pilots yet. And putting them into an F-16, and then we would make sure that everybody shot the gun in training. In fact, they had to qualify with the gun as a weapon. And so the first time experience for anybody shooting the gun in an F-16 is a little bit of an emotional experience. People would say funny things, they would cuss. It was all on the tapes, the HUD tapes, the heads-up display recordings. And we come back in the debrief and kind of laugh at the students because they knew that they were gonna go shoot the gun, and it was always shooting at a target on the ground is when they would do this for the first time, strafe. And so it's a little bit intense. You're diving at the ground, you're doing 450, 500 knots pointed at the ground. Obviously, there's a survival instinct that kicks in there. You're trying to put the pipper on the target. You pull the trigger for the first time, and the whole jet shakes violently. It's like somebody started up a chainsaw just in your left ear. And the whole jet is shaking, and your hand's on the throttle there. And I can always remember every time I would shoot the gun, there's this hard foam insulation that's just behind the closeout panel. But the vibrations would cause some of those little bits of foam to flake off, and they would come around the closeout panel. And every time I would go shoot the gun for practice, for strafe, I'd come back, and as I'm getting out of the airplane, I'd see like these little yellow flecks of foam all over my green flight suit on my left arm. They would just, the vibrations were so intense. You get used to it after the first time you shoot it. It's a little bit of an emotional event, and after that, you're focused on, I need to put those rounds on target. So the F-16 is incredibly well integrated as far as a weapon system with that gun, and I will tell you that both for air-to-ground and also for air-to-air, the gun sights on the F-16 are incredibly precise, and even with dynamics on the aircraft, even under maneuvers in terms of air-to-air shoots where we're shooting at a banner. There's not been a lot of actual air-to-air dogfighting with the gun in recent memory, but the F-16 is incredibly accurate when it shoots at air-to-air practice targets to the point of it's almost not even fair. It used to be kind of a scoring, kind of a skill thing, and now you can just park the pipper on the target, open up, and it just shreds anything you point it at in terms of an air-to-air target. And then in terms of air-to-ground, you can be extremely precise with it. It's not quite a laser beam, but you can be extremely precise, and there's even ways that you can couple up other sensors on the aircraft and share information, even in a at-night, blacked out type of close air support role. You can hit what you want to hit on the ground.
All from a gun hidden away inside the tiny fighter. If we follow this leading edge strake down the wing, we come to another device designed to increase lift at high angles of attack, the leading edge flap. It deflects downwards during high angle of attack maneuvers to delay stall, allowing air to remain attached to the wing surface. When performing a sustained turn at 0.9 Mach at cruising altitude, it increases lift by 18% and decreases drag by 22%. You can see them actuate here during the 5G takeoff I performed with the Thunderbirds back in 2019. The seam between the leading edge flap and the main wing is barely noticeable, and fitting a control system into this wing, which is only around 4 centimeters thick where the actuator system needed to fit, proved a challenge. The amount of torque needed to actuate a control surface like this at 0.9 Mach is not trivial.
I'm getting tired. I'm just gonna pop the bell. And I'm going to bed. Oh my god, I'm so tired. Need some sleep. Man, getting old. I'm getting old.
To solve this problem, power is transferred from 2 hydraulic motors, which convert the pressure in the hydraulic system into rotational motion. The hydraulic drive motor itself is tucked away behind the M61 rotary cannon, next to the hydraulic motor that drives the cannon's rotation and ammo drive system. This power has to be transferred to the wing, and this is done through a series of torque shafts, angular gearboxes, and down another series of torque shafts with rotary actuators in between. This leading edge flap is not controlled by the pilot, however. It's controlled automatically by the flight computer, and the F-16 was groundbreaking in this regard. The F-16 was the first fighter aircraft to have a fly-by-wire system controlling every control surface. The leading edge flaps, the flaperons, the rudder, and the horizontal tail of the F-16 are not controlled directly by the pilot. A fly-by-wire system uses a network of sensors, wires and computers, as well as the pilot's own input to control the plane. The F-16 was employing this new technological wizardry to allow it to efficiently spend the energy its single jet engine provided. Traditional flight control systems up to this point used a mechanical system connected directly to the pilot's controls to manipulate the flight surfaces. This is footage of the F-4's control system, a heavy and complicated network of cables, rods, linkages, and hydraulics. It even has a 2-kilogram bob weight attached to the pilot's stick, a mechanism designed to make it harder to pull the stick as G's increase, an analog feedback system. To provide the pilot with analog feedback on speed, the F-4 also featured a diaphragm that deflected with ram air taken from this probe on the vertical fin. This introduced a force that acted to push the stick backwards and indicated to the pilot to adjust a trim setting. This system not only added a huge amount of weight to the F-4, reducing its maneuverability, it also added workload to the pilot and was more vulnerable to damage in dogfights with little redundancy. With a fly-by-wire system, none of this was needed. The first batch of F-16s actually had a stick that was immovable. It was just force sensing. Later, a small amount of movement was added after pilots complained.
So the non-movable stick, kind of little known fact, you know, the original F-16, it wasn't a Lockheed Martin product, it was General Dynamics. And they had made the F-111 previously, and the weapon system operator on the F-111 had a small joystick that they could use to steer the attack radar. And that was a force-based movement. It wasn't really a joystick that would move, it was just the apply force. And so they took that same concept and then they put it into the F-16 stick. So it was sort of a General Dynamics thing of, we've got a force transducer, a control inceptor is what you'd call that. So what it turns out though is that the human body does really well with knowing where your limbs, hands are moving. Knowing the position of your body is something that you naturally do pretty well, and that is something called proprioceptive feedback. Well, when I have a force-based inceptor, I don't get that proprioceptive feedback anymore. And it's really hard to judge. It's something that I think if you challenge yourself to go pick up a small weight at the gym and ask yourself, how much does that weigh without looking at it? It's actually kind of hard to guess when you're down in those few pounds range. And the maximum force you can put on the F-16 side stick is 25 pounds. So it's kind of hard to tell the difference between 15 pounds and 15.2 pounds. We don't do very well with that. We do a lot better with knowing how far we've pulled something. And so the original F-16 controls didn't move, and what pilots found was that they were having a difficult time, the test pilots at Edwards were having a difficult time judging exactly how hard they would move the controls, and so they would think they were going to get a certain response from the jet, and then they weren't, and then they'd pull harder, too hard, and then they'd get a different response. There is a phenomenon called pilot-induced oscillations, or pilot-in-the-loop oscillations. Sometimes it's just shortened to PIO. And the F-16, even to this day, particularly if you have a lot of wing stores, can have a little bit of a wing rock on landing. And if you look at some videos of F-16s landing, sometimes you can find, if they have wing tanks or they're bringing back some bombs that they didn't expend, you'll find an F-16 that'll sort of do this little back and forth wing rock. And that is still to this day, it's an artifact of having a side stick that doesn't move very much, because it's one of those things that in terms of the mind to the hand, eye-hand coordination, you start to make a movement. By the time you see the effect, it's more than you wanted. So you take it out, you put in a correction. By the time the correction takes effect, it's more than you wanted. You see it, you come back. It's a feedback loop in our minds.
That's what I need,
and
dude.
Now, PIO is kind of a dirty word in aircraft design, and nobody wants any PIOs. I'll tell you, PIOs, pilot-induced oscillations, are like snakes. And some snakes are very dangerous, and some snakes are not. And so the PIO that's remaining in the F-16 in terms of its wing rock on final at landing is not super dangerous.
These pilot-induced oscillations can also be naturally stabilized through passive stability. where the plane naturally
Yes, it's gonna-
self-corrects itself without pilot input. However, the F-16 was the first aircraft in history to do away with passive stability and make the plane intentionally unstable in flight. This was done because it lowers the energy needed to fly and maneuver.
We can understand why with this simple analogy. Here we have two situations, a ball placed on top of a hill and a ball placed in a valley. If we push the ball on top of the hill even a tiny bit, it will begin to accelerate down the hill and will not stop until we put energy in to slow it down. This is an unstable system. The opposite is true for the ball in the valley. Apply a force and the ball will roll uphill, and gravity will now provide a restoring force to bring it back. It may oscillate back and forth a few times before coming to a stop, but it will eventually return to its original position. This is a stable system. We want to tailor our stability to find a balance between these two scenarios, where we can cause a rapid change in direction with a small energy input, while also managing the amount of energy required to get back to our original
Yeah,
position.
I'm done.
This is called relaxed static stability. The F-16's pitch stability is one of the areas where this idea was applied. One of the key factors that affects pitch stability is the location of the center of gravity and center of lift. The center of gravity for the F4 is located about here. This is the point at which all lift will act around. It's like the fulcrum on a seesaw. As a result of the wing design, the center of lift is slightly behind the center of gravity.